Good afternoon, and welcome to the Ecosystem-Led Growth for Entrepreneurial Success. My name is Chris Hart, and I'm a managing director at NASDAQ. For those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that is building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. Check out those links and resources in the chat. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. First, please let us know where you are dialing in from the chat in terms of your location. That's quite helpful for us to know. Secondly, we will open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to them all. Of course, none of what we could do would be possible at the center without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. Before we get started, I'm going to launch a poll to step back and take a temperature gauge on how all of you are doing today. We use this information to guide the wellness programs we provide for our global community of entrepreneurs. So there's only two questions. How are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? Okay, well, I'm thrilled to report that nobody is fearful. Roughly 10% of the crowd is feeling anxious, 25% is surviving, and about 65% are optimistic. So that's terrific. The second question is, what is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or just surviving? Okay, about 10% of the crowd is spending their sleepless nights thinking about finance, about 45% sales, 15% marketing, about 25% achieving scale, and 8% are just trying to keep their head above water and surviving. So thank you all so much for your participation. This is very helpful context for us. And without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest, Bob Moore. And Bob is the CEO of Crossbeam and author of his newest book, Ecosystem-Led Growth, a blueprint for sales and marketing success using the power of partnerships. Please welcome Bob.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. And a huge thank you to Chris and the whole team at NASDAQ and the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center for creating such a great platform and place to chat about this stuff. Thrilled to see the optimism that exists in the poll. Even more thrilled to see that sales and marketing add up to more than 50% of the areas of attention for everybody, because that is definitely the sweet spot of where we're going to spend some time, do a little storytelling, and then hopefully come away with some really good playbooks and tactics that everybody can take back to their companies, regardless of what stage they're at in their journey. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here setting the stage with, honestly, the very story that brought me to this topic of ecosystem-led growth personally. I'm a three-time founder. Crossbeam is actually my third company, but the journey of building those first two companies and kind of the circumstances under which those companies were acquired taught me a bunch of lessons that led to this core thesis around ecosystems and partner ecosystems potentially being the most prolific growth driver that could exist for companies kind of in this next generation of growth that we're entering into. So I want to share a little bit of that roller coaster ride with you all. As founders, hopefully it's something you can really relate to. And then we can parlay that into this topic of ecosystem-led growth and what is it? What are the playbooks that really matter within it? And ultimately, where can you learn more about it? So, if that sounds good to everybody, I'm going to hop into sharing some slides here and get right to it. Along the way, feel free to hop in with questions in the chat. There's a Q&A section here. Chris is going to go into fireside chat mode with me after I'm done presenting here, so there should be ample time to answer everybody's questions along the way. So with that said, let's dive right in. I've broken this down into three parts today, and part one is kind of my favorite and least favorite, I guess you could say. This is the story that I call my $2.6 billion mistake. And in the book, Ecosystem-Led Growth, this is kind of the framing for what brought me into this subject area to begin with. And in order to tell this story, it kind of requires rolling back the clock a little bit to 2008. You can see a picture of me there. That's me on the left in the cargo khaki shorts. Always a flattering look. I promise it was in back in 2008. I had been working at a venture capital firm called Insight Partners, which is not only still around to this day, but an absolutely thriving firm that's based in New York, kind of a prolific SaaS and growth capital investor. I was doing work there looking into e-commerce businesses and software businesses, and ended up with a really high level of conviction that data and specifically data in the cloud was going to be this huge area of need for companies in the decade to come. And I quit my job on a Friday in September 2008 with my business partner, a guy named Jake Stein, who is standing next to me, also wearing cargo khaki shorts in that photo. And Jake and I decided to start this company called RJ Metrics. And we left Insight on a Friday in September 2008, and on Saturday, Lehman Brothers collapsed. And we kind of got dropped out there as founders in the middle of, certainly the most significant financial crisis since the dot-com bust, and in an area where venture capital had kind of dried up. But what we did have was an idea, and an idea that we liked a lot. And at its core, the idea behind RJ Metrics was simple. It was, we're going to build something that lives entirely in the cloud, that is delivered to you over the internet, that solves all the analytics needs of your business. If you see that diagram in the bottom left there, the basic idea behind RJ Metrics was, we're going to extract data from all the places that it lives. And for the most part, that was people's, back-end databases of who their users were and who was buying what. Then we're going to warehouse it in our private cloud in this thing called a data warehouse that we stand up and maintain for you. And then we're going to give you this really cool interface that you can log into, where you can view the charts and dashboards and customize your reports. So it's all totally done in the cloud. Doesn't sound super novel right now, but in 2008, this was kind of a bleeding edge idea, and we were, kind of a first in its class. And because of that, we had this pretty exciting journey. For the first 2 or 3 years of the business, we really went through your classic lean startup experience, where we got to build, measure, learn, and go through that cycle in a completely bootstrapped manner. We didn't raise any capital for the first 2.5 years in the company, and we got to our first $1 million in revenue and our first 100 enterprise customers and our first dozen or so employees, all profitably, all kind of growing based on the revenue from our customers, which was incredible. And we really, in a lot of ways, we're kind of early to the market, but we did a good job of capturing all of those early adopters that existed. And a lot of those were e-commerce companies and kind of digital native, digital first companies that were really starting to be the up and comers in that era. And by 2011, the market started waking back up. Venture capital started showing up again in a really big way. And we finally got the opportunity to start raising capital. And that's exactly what we did. So, in 2012, we raised a seed round. And then in 2013, a Series A. And 2014, a Series B. And kind of where this line here is our revenue growth throughout that time. We got into this really glorious era of incredible product market fit, where we had kind of been there early, and then when the market woke up and was interested in what we were doing, we were able to kind of strike while that iron was hot. So I call this a little bit of a tortoise and the hare story, though, because we were the tortoise for sure. Well, as soon as the market woke up, all the hares started showing up as well. And while we raised a good amount of venture capital in that era, one of the things that happened is a lot of other companies that were better at raising money than we were started to emerge. And we started competing really often with companies like Good Data and Domo and Burst, which you can see in that same era, that kind of 2012 to 2016 era, each raised many, many, many times the amount of capital that we did. In the case of Domo, tens of times as much capital as we did, hundreds of millions of dollars. And this had a really profound effect on the market that we were in terms of crowdedness. But then another thing happened that was even more disruptive, which is Amazon Web Services released this product called Redshift, which was basically this large cloud-based data warehouse. Now, if you remember, right smack in the middle of our product was this data warehouse that we had built and we had engineered. It was just a little sliver of our product, but it was the place where all the data was stored and where all the queries ran. And Redshift was just better. It was better than any data warehouse that any company had ever built or any analytical database that anybody had ever optimized before. It was cheap. It was cloud-based. It was fast. It was available within people's own Amazon clouds, and it became really popular in the market. And it kind of started to shift the sands under our feet in terms of how people like to use and consume analytics. So this paradigm shift then happened, right? You think about those three pieces of our model. The one in the middle basically got replaced in a lot of companies by something really appealing. All of a sudden, people went from not having anything in that slot to their ops teams or their engineering teams already using a product that kind of took care of that green circle part of the problem. Back in those days, we didn't really look closely at the idea that this might be something that's disruptive to us. Like, we weren't really a data warehouse. We didn't think of ourselves as competing with Amazon or competing with these data warehousing products. They were sold to different buyers, and it was a very different kind of technological approach. But what we started realizing over the long term is that this actually was really, really changing the way a lot of companies wanted to go about doing analytics, because when they already had an awesome data warehouse where all their data lived, maybe they didn't want to buy all three of these pieces from us. And that meant our other two pieces got less valuable too. Quickly after Redshift, Google releases Google BigQuery, new companies like Snowflake show up. These are all companies that play in the same market, these centralized data warehouses. And once they emerged, a whole new host of players starting in the 20 teens suddenly emerged on the scene. And we started seeing companies like Looker and Mode and Periscope and Chartio, not to mention old gold standards like Tableau and Power BI, all showing up just to do the blue part. Right? So the charts and the dashboards part of our product, again, there was kind of this new stack emerging where people would buy a warehouse and put one of these analytics tools on top of it and suddenly have something that, the sum of its parts was actually better and more valuable than the totality of our suite solution at RJ Metrics. This kind of emerged into what people now call the modern data stack, right? It's this way in which products in the analytics space kind of get stitched together or stacked together inside of companies in order to create a really valuable end solution or set of solutions for the business that consumes them. And it's pretty disruptive to the old school way of, hey, your one-stop shop, buy it all in kind of a suite solution, where there's a lot less customizability, but you kind of just rely on the software vendor to do all that gluing together. So what was the end result? I showed that glorious line before of the incredible growth we saw from '09 to, call it 2013 or so. By 2015, we had basically fallen out of product market fit. And this is a really consequential time because I mentioned all those competitors we had that were direct competitors to ours, like Good Data and Domo. Those created market dynamics where a bunch of companies doing the same exact thing all had too much money. And because of that, they were spending it on ads, they were spending it on content marketing, they were spending it on outbound calling teams. They flooded the market, and we participated in that with just too much kind of recruitment of potential business, squeezing us from one side, making everything very, very difficult to differentiate and to acquire companies with. But then from the other side, we got squeezed by new technology, and the actual relevance of our entire product category, including all those other overfunded players, started to diminish. And because of that, our total addressable market just got smaller and smaller and smaller. And our pricing model and our go-to-market model became really misaligned. And we kind of got squeezed down to just a couple of verticals that mattered. One of the ways I like to talk about this RJ Metrics story is, people talk about product market fit when building companies as this kind of elusive, magical thing that happens when what you're building lines up with what the market wants. And That is precisely what it is. But people in the founder seat very often think about it as though the market wants what it wants, and that is relatively static. And the way that you can find product market fit is by iterating and pivoting and learning and incrementally improving your product until it kind of lands squarely in alignment with what the market wants. And that is a great way of going about doing it in the universe where your market is not moving extremely quickly and your ability to iterate is very high. That's actually not what happened at RJ. What happened at RJ is that we had a vision for a particular product and we built it. And that product actually didn't change all that much over time. But what did change is that the market went on this really radical journey of constant disruption. And over about an 8-year time period, we went from being early and actually being ahead of the market to having this glorious product market fit window where we were exactly what the market wanted to suddenly becoming too old and being a previous generation solution because the advent of the modern data stack kind of made us an antiquated way to go about business. So within, less than a 10-year time period, the market went through an entire unbundling cycle, which kind of made us relevant and then made us irrelevant all in one fell swoop. And we didn't stay far enough ahead of where that market was going or an awareness of that to actually survive through that time period. So what happened in that era? This is one of the most chilling charts that I ever had in one of my board decks. I saved it and set it aside exactly to just remind myself of what can happen when you're not paying attention to strategy and kind of your best form of go-to-market motions in a situation like this. The red line there was our net new MRR plan in 2015, and the blue line is what we actually achieved, right? 2015 is basically the year where we got clobbered. We fell out of product market fit, and we came to realize that, and we grew, but we just didn't grow anything like the multi-100% targets that we had set for ourselves. It was a very rude awakening. But interestingly, and this is where this ecosystem-led growth concept starts to kind of emerge, those companies in the modern data stack, they weren't really suffering from the problems that we were. Companies like the Lookers of the world and the Snowflakes of the world, they had an advantage that we were not able to tap into. And, for one, the way that they created user value by joining up their value propositions with other products, like allowing their customers to buy these products that were very interoperable, very compatible, let the customers feel a high amount of control and customizability, but also let the value story of each individual product really shine. And it made for their ability to really focus in and be great at one particular thing as opposed to pretty good at a lot of things. The other benefit they had was stickiness. So these products that people ended up buying in these stacks were more valuable together than they were apart. So what that meant was if you bought a data warehouse and you bought a dashboarding tool to put on top, and maybe you bought a data pipeline solution to get data into that warehouse, ripping out any one of those products would effectively break the other ones. It would cause them to be less valuable or less useful. So as long as the entire stack was working well, then every one of the products could kind of latch onto each other and be as sticky as the stickiest one. Because if anyone went out, then it would diminish the value of the others. And it really allowed companies to build a much more kind of high retention, high expansion opportunity dynamic inside of the way that the buyers bought them. And then the other and most exciting thing was these new go-to-market motions emerging. When you're in a world where you are part of an ecosystem of products or a stack of products that's being purchased, and you can wire services into that too, right? Services that go alongside them. When these products and services get bought side by side or kind of in conjunction with a bigger strategy, it creates these awesome opportunities to do co-selling, co-marketing, basically cross-pollinating the customer bases and sales pipelines of all the different products that exist inside of a space. That is a really, really big deal because it means that a lead for one of those companies is potentially a lead for all of those companies, and they can actually increase each other's likelihood of winning deals, being able to position their products in a way that wins, et cetera. And that kind of hints at some of the playbooks we're going to get to here with ELG. So I looked over at the people in the modern data stack, and the grass is always greener when you look across to your competition in any given time. But in this particular case, it just felt like they were onto something. And in totality, what was really going on is that these companies in the modern data stack, they were able to use this ecosystem-led growth strategy. And at RJ Metrics, we were stuck in the old way. So, we kind of grew a lot of conviction around the idea that we had we had to change. Something had to change. And what we ended up doing was, you know, RJ Metrics had grown large enough that it was a pretty valuable company. It just had started suffering from slower and slower growth rates. We were never going to make it to IPO, but we did have a company on our hands that was interesting to a lot of potential acquirers. So we structured a deal where we were able to basically sell the RJ Metrics company to Magento, which would soon after, by the way, be acquired by Adobe. RJ Metrics is part of the Adobe Commerce Suite today. And also spin out a little bit of technology from RJ Metrics, which was just the part that puts data into data warehouses. And we spun that out into a new company and we called it Stitch. So we kind of did this, if you can't beat them, join them deal, where as a byproduct of selling the suite solution, we also got to start something that fit into the modern data stack a little better. Basically, we jettisoned the green and blue circles from our product and we just kept the red one. And that red one was a service that was really, really good at pulling data out of all the places that it lives and dropping it into a data warehouse. Only instead of dropping it into our green circle, we released a product that could drop it into anybody's data warehouse anywhere. So we went from being enemies with the Redshifts and the Snowflakes and the Lookers of the world to partners with them. They would want to use our RJ Metrics pipeline product, which later was called Stitch. And Stitch could actually get data into those warehouses, which was something they really need to do to create value, to build the dashboards people wanted, et cetera. Basically, we joined the modern data stack. And it was an incredible experience. In about 20 months, Stitch grew to as many customers as it took us 8 years to get at RJ Metrics. We put a full focus on ecosystem-led growth and product-led growth strategies at that company. We were able to grow to a really meaningful revenue and customer scale with a really, really small lean team, mainly by co-selling and cross-selling and kind of running ELG plays with all the other players in the modern data stack space. And in less than 2 years of operating, we were acquired for $60 million in cash by Talent, and without any outside venture capital investment inside of that business. And really, with about a 25-person staff at the time. It was an incredible journey, and one that was really, really exciting to get to experience. But frankly, that kind of left me wanting more. In some ways, it's like a Goldilocks situation where, RJ Metrics, I felt like we had a good idea, but we weren't experienced, and we kind of held on to it for too long and like missed our window. And then at Stitch, we had another good idea and we were experienced, but in some ways, maybe we sold it too soon. Like we had just kind of figured out how to make things work, and Talent basically made us an offer we couldn't refuse in that moment, and we said yes. And in that moment, I decided to kind of take a step back and look at what I had learned in that time and think really hard about what to do next. But in the midst of all that, something else happened, which is Looker, which was our number one competitor at RJ Metrics, got acquired by Google for $2.6 billion. So when I talk about our $2.6 billion mistake, like sure, there were some exits here and there were ones where we put real points on the board. I always think about this opportunity cost of, had we been smarter, operated better, kind of been able to see around corners on where the market was going, a business that for a long time we were neck and neck with and was kind of our chief competitor, they won and we lost, and they ended up selling for $2.6 billion, which is roughly, on the order of 100x what we sold RJ Metrics for. Like a really, really inspiring, but also chilling number to see and to have lived through. So, I decided to kind of, take stock in all the things that I had learned, and take any chip on the shoulder that I might have had from those journeys, and try one more time, and go about starting this third company. So it just so happens that the ecosystem-led growth lessons I had learned through the RJ Metrics and Stitch story would end up being the key to all that. So let's talk about ecosystem-led growth. Ecosystem-led growth at its core is this go-to-market motion that focuses on partner ecosystems as the primary way that companies can attract, convert, and grow customer relationships. This is the stuff that we had a really hard time doing at RJ Metrics because we didn't have any partners, because we did it all ourselves. And it's also the thing that works so incredibly well and so seamlessly in the modern data stack, because the nature of how customers bought those products was to buy them basically from multiple vendors kind of interoperating with one another. And as I looked around the universe of technology, there was a very clear thing happening the maturity of the API economy and the cloud kind of entered us into this new era where it wasn't just the modern data stack where this dynamic was happening. We saw it in technology for online commerce. We saw it in technology for marketing, for sales. We saw it in technology for cybersecurity. We saw it in vertical SaaS within HR and education, and even the construction industry, and places with kind of more traditional ties. Software was becoming unbundled and interoperable at a really, really high rate. And because of that, the buyer dynamic, how people were buying software, was fundamentally changing. They were buying multiple products to combine into something that would answer a strategic question, as opposed to these single point solutions. And because of that, it creates this moment where ecosystem-led growth really matters more than ever. So what does it take to do ecosystem-led growth? Well, this is kind of the question that led me to founding Crossbeam, because when you want to do any of these ELG plays, there are a very simple set of questions that you come across. And they sound easy, right? The kind of questions that you want to answer are ones that involve your partner's data being compared to yours. Questions like, hey, partner, how many customers do we have in common and who are they? Or, hey, partner, are my sales reps currently selling to any of the same companies that your sales reps are selling to? Or can we get alerted when we're selling to the same company at the same time? Because it probably means they're embarking on some bigger strategy. Well, the tricky thing when you try to answer those questions by nature is that math is just working against you. Like, you can't draw a Venn diagram between two data sets unless you have all of the data from both of those data sets. But for most companies, having all the data from both those data sets means I've got to give my partner my complete list of all my customers, or I've got to give them full access to my entire sales pipeline. And no matter how much you love your partner, that sounds like a non-starter, right? The security and privacy and just overall operational risk associated with oversharing has always scared companies away from collaborating that deeply. So the solution historically has been companies doing this thing called account mapping, which is a kind of antiquated process of just emailing a bunch of spreadsheets around and trying to approximate and guess at where there might be some overlap. And it's a very, very flawed process, but it's widely done by just about any company of scale in the technology space. The idea for Crossbeam was to solve this prisoner's dilemma style problem that exists when companies want to collaborate by giving them a new kind of platform, something that more or less functions like an escrow service for data that can sit in between companies who want to collaborate with each other and do all the hard stuff in service of answering those Venn diagram style questions. So, for each company, it can connect to their CRM system, it can ingest their data, it can kind of map that data to a universal data model, and it can allow them to use a central platform where they can answer those questions about where data sets overlap or how data sets overlap without actually sharing any underlying raw data that they don't want to share with the other side. And the result is what you see in this graphic here, right? The most standard example is this account mapping matrix, which is dynamically and automatically updated over time for anybody that's on Crossbeam, where they can constantly be aware of how their prospects and opportunities and customers intersect with the prospects and opportunities and customers of their partners, but ultimately retain extreme amounts of control over who can see what, when, and under what circumstances, and the workflows that get unlocked as a result of that data flowing. Basically, you retain ownership of your own data, but you get the answers to all these questions about how and where your data intersects. And it is an incredibly, incredibly powerful unlock for a new generation of playbooks to emerge around ecosystem-led growth, co-selling, cross-selling, co-marketing, et cetera. This is what Crossbeam powers. And what's been very exciting about Crossbeam is just how virally that network has grown. So we launched in 2019. Since then, we've grown to over 17,000 companies on the Crossbeam network, and that includes some of the largest companies in technology. Over 90% of the Forbes Cloud 100. We're now over 1,000 companies that are kind of in that either public or pre-IPO scale of 100 million plus annual revenue and growing quickly. A huge long tail of small and mid-market and venture-backed kind of growth style businesses across a huge universe of verticals. This stuff has really, really been able to hit the ground running and pick up a lot of speed out there. And it's no surprise, because in looking at the way in which those 17,000 companies run these ecosystem-led growth playbooks, we get our hands on the data, right? And we can kind of put our money where our mouth is. The deals that end up getting sourced or influenced by these ecosystem-led growth playbooks and by the data and relationships that come out of that Crossbeam network graph, they're 53% more likely to close, across our universe of users. They're 46% faster in terms of how quickly they close and make their way through sales pipelines. And most importantly, in this modern era where kind of retention and NRR are the metrics that are the most important to most companies, ELG source customers are 58% less likely to churn, which is really incredible. We kind of keep our finger on the pulse of this data, and update it constantly with all the new signals we have coming in through our product. Well, I also love this stat. There's an organization called Pavilion, which is a consortium and community of chief revenue officers and sales leaders. They ran a pulse report in February of this year and just asked the question, how much do you focus on ecosystem-led growth? It's been so exciting to see. This isn't our survey, right? This is from another community that's just full of people in sales roles. And the overwhelming majority of people are increasing the amount of investment that's happening in ELG. And in fact, so much so that about a quarter of them are doing much, much more in 2024 than they were in 2023. Really exciting trend to see happening. This ELG stuff is really, really catching on, which is great. This leads me to the playbooks, right? The natural question that comes up, which is, what do you actually do with this stuff? The book, Ecosystem-Led Growth, that I mentioned, that was published just a few weeks ago through Wiley, and we're really fortunate to have hit national bestseller status in the USA Today and Publishers Weekly bestseller list a few weeks back. It is chock full of these playbooks. The spirit of the book is basically to tell the stories of all the companies that have done this well and how they've done it and how you can apply that in your business. I don't have a ton of time here today to go into all those details, but I did want to pick out one that just kind of drives this home that I love a bunch, right? So part of what the book does is walk through all the different departments in your revenue funnel, from marketing to sales to customer success and beyond, and talk through all the various plays that you can run. The one I wanted to include here was one in the marketing universe around just sourcing new sales pipeline or sales leads using data from your ecosystem. And the way that it does that is through this concept of ecosystem qualified leads. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? The play here is that if you think about your universe of prospects in the account mapping matrix, that's all of the boxes on the bottom row of that matrix. And you look at your partner ecosystem, and using Crossbeam, you can get an insight into how your prospect list overlaps with the prospects and the open opportunities and the customers of all of your various partners. And if you add up all that data, it becomes this really interesting fire hose of information about, across the universe of prospects you might have, which might include every person who's ever filled out a form on your website or whose badge you've scanned at a trade show or who has subscribed to your newsletter, this giant list for most companies. And it gives you this ability to constantly, on a real-time basis, be running a magnet over top of that haystack of potential buyers and always picking up all the needles in the haystack who have something interesting going on in terms of their buying or researching behaviors. If they just bought a product from a company that is partnered with you, where you have a complementary value proposition, where when your product is used alongside theirs, it's more valuable. That is an incredibly powerful buying signal and piece of intent data about where and how you might want to focus the energy that goes on in your marketing organization. If someone is in the sales pipeline of multiple products that are complementary to yours, it's usually an indicator that there's some kind of larger strategic initiative or buying initiative going on inside of that company that might be an opportunity for you to get involved and get exposure there. And generally just seeing how and where there are these hot zones of where your partners might be targeting or prospecting other companies may create opportunities for you to do things like co-marketing webinars across large shared audiences, working at different events that maybe are hosted by or are sponsored by your partners to make sure you show up in the right ways with the right joint value proposition and story. Generally, it allows you to focus that energy away from traditional marketing activities that might be broad-based and kind of, have SDRs call every company on your list or, buy a billboard on the 101 to try and, drum up that interest. And instead doing a much more focused, targeted set of ongoing campaigns that's constantly and dynamically updating based on what's going on in your prospect list throughout the rest of your ecosystem. This is an incredibly powerful thing. And when one of those needles gets plucked up by the magnet, basically, that's what we call an ecosystem qualified lead. It's one of your leads where there's some behavior, data, knowledge, relationship that exist out there in your ecosystem that makes it special and then makes it worth spending time and attention and resources on. It makes your marketing efforts and your pipeline development efforts much smarter, much more intelligent, much more dynamic. And there are some really great stories in the book about how companies do this. Stripe is one where Peter Cummings, who is the head of the EMEA partner ecosystem for Stripe, he's a big champion of this ecosystem qualified lead concept. He's got some quotes in the book that I love, but it's the key, he says, right? In the new world of ELG, we put partner teams on equal footing and we qualify leads using data from our ecosystem. I love this quote because he talks about the data from his ecosystem, right? This doesn't involve putting a partner team professional in the middle of every single conversation or every single lead. This is scalable. This is something where it's ultimately something your sales and marketing teams can be enabled on directly. And the partner teams are this enabling layer that brings you the data, but they don't have to be the ones that are necessarily executing in the middle of these conversations or these activations. What that brings you is scale. And what that means is that it can be very, very ROI efficient and very, very large in magnitude over time without costing a huge amount of money, which is really super exciting. So I mentioned, right, the ELG book hit this national bestseller status, which we're super pumped about. There's a link in the deck, and I think we'll send this deck along to attendees as well, that links out to the book. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it internationally at your favorite local bookseller. And the other thing I am excited to mention is that May 15th and 16th, we at Crossbeam, along with a consortium of companies known as the ELG Alliance, are hosting a conference called the Ecosystem-Led Growth Conference. It's going to be really exciting. I'll be there personally. We've got some really great world-class speakers who really know the ins and outs of ELG. It's a great, great, great diverse makeup of founders, sales leaders, marketing leaders, partnership professionals, all converging to geek out about ELG in one place. Anybody who wants to join would absolutely love to see you there. It's happening in Austin, and if you just Google Ecosystem-Led Growth Conference, you'll find it. So, with that said, I want to invite Chris to come on back. I know some questions have come in through the Zoom Q&A feature here, and happy to do a little fireside chatting before we wrap up.
Oh, that's great, Bob. That was terrific. Thank you for that. Parts 1, 2, and 3. Everybody knows 2 is not enough and 4 is too many, right? So 3 parts was great. So let's start live Q&A. Here's a short one. How do I do this as the only person in my company? Is it the same structure? I am just one person.
Yeah, great question. So there's a chapter in the book that kind of begs this question, which I think is on a lot of people's minds when they learn about this, which is like, is ELG right for my company? And another way of saying that is, when is ELG right for my company, or is it right for my company now? And the way that this question gets answered is through this kind of 2x2 matrix concept, where you have to ask yourself 2 questions. One of them is, just generally, what's my overall scale and influence as a business in general, right? As companies get larger, they tend to be more of a center of gravity in their partner ecosystem, and it just makes things easier. People are more interested in partnering with them. People are more interested in tapping into, their customer bases and their ecosystems and their audiences. And once you get this gravitational pull going, it almost becomes like a predetermined fate that you're going to end up becoming a bit of a platform company and having your own ecosystem around you. So the larger companies get, that becomes one of the levels. But there's another level, and the second question in that 2x2 that's actually more important, and that really, really applies when you are a one-person company. The question you should be asking yourself is, how much is being ecosystem-led fundamentally built into the DNA of the value proposition of my product? And what I mean by that is, how much is your product typically consumed on an island by itself, kind of as a standalone experience, versus typically being consumed as part of some larger universe of other products that, when combined, contribute to some strategy? So, I'll give you an example, which is like I mentioned the modern data stack there, right? If very few people ever just buy Snowflake as a data warehouse, right? What you're doing is you're buying Snowflake and you're putting a business intelligence tool on top of it that's going to query Snowflake and give you your charts and dashboards. And you're probably buying a data pipeline tool that streams data into Snowflake so that you can get all the data that you need into it. But it's very, very rare that you would just buy that one thing, right? It's most common that the true value of your product ends up getting expressed through the other products that you end up using alongside of it. You could think the same way in the sales technology universe. Like, are you in the Salesforce App Exchange ecosystem? Well, you're likely have some meaningful amount of ecosystem-led growth in your DNA just by virtue of the fact that your product may sit on top of Salesforce or as an add-on to Salesforce, or at least ingest data and interoperate with Salesforce. This is true in so many different categories. And the question of whether you sit inside of an ecosystem or you're used alongside other tools, even if you don't directly integrate with them, is a really essential one. So if you're a small company and you have very low ecosystem DNA in the way you deliver value, the honest answer is ELG is probably not right for you yet. And if you're a one-person show that just kind of delivers an isolated value prop, you may want to wait until you're at a larger scale and you've got more of a center of gravity effect when you can kind of get away with starting to introduce some ecosystem strategies or trying to kind of bolt that onto your business model. But trying to bolt it on too soon or prematurely, you'll kind of catch yourself in a chicken and egg problem of it never really taking off. But if you're small and you index really high on ecosystem-led growth, then you can start to implement a lot of these things, and you can do it as a solo founder or a solo entrepreneur. And the best way to do that is to start asking these questions of, what is the story where my customers end up having a better experience, not just with my product, but with other products when they use our products side by side or products and services side by side. So even if you have a very small customer base, as long as the introduction of your product makes some other company's product better, makes their product stickier, makes their product more interesting, then you have an intrinsic motivation for that other company to partner with you and potentially go down the path of co-selling, co-marketing, et cetera. Even if it's a David and Goliath situation and they're a lot larger than you, if their product will sell faster, if their product will become stickier, if their customers will get more value out, then they're motivated. And those are the kind of the big questions to be asking and trying to identify what those products potentially are. And then as a solo operator, I think the biggest thing that you can do is put the data first. Don't get lost in building in order to prioritize or identify who to work with. What you really want to do is answer the question first of, in the event that we do build this integration, will there be a large enough addressable market that it actually makes sense? How many prospects or ideal customers or existing customers already overlap between my company and this potential partner? And you can find that data out using Crossbeam. Like that's the nature of what we do, right? We can answer those questions for you before you've built anything. You just have to partner with that prospective integration partner first in our platform, size up the market, and then determine where you might want to make those investments. So I would say focus on the data, but also do a reality check of how kind of ecosystem focused your business model is at its core. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you for that, Bob. Okay, so another one here. So here's some nice feedback. Great presentation and solution. I've used Crossbeam and it's a proven and valuable solution.
Awesome.
How do you communicate with sales leaders to help them understand the importance of prioritizing ecosystems as a primary component of their go-to-market versus direct sales? I've found most CROs, especially early stage companies, for the most part, prioritize direct sale as their go-to-market. And I feel like maybe you addressed this a little bit with that chart you showed earlier in the presentation, but nevertheless, I think that's an interesting question.
It's a great question, and honestly, it's the reason I wrote this book, because there's a truth out there that I think is worth acknowledging, which is, when it comes to things in the universe of partnerships and partner ecosystems, there is an unfortunate and uncomfortable tension that exists between partnership professionals and sales professionals. And I think it's one that is easy to get partner pros and sales pros to acknowledge when you talk about it. But I think there's kind of a built-in skepticism that exists in a lot of sales professionals' minds where they think of partner teams as being kind of a nice to have. And what I mean by that is, their history or their legacy of interacting with partnerships and partner people, whether fair or not, is kind of laced with this idea that oh, partnership people may be kind of messing around in my deals and introducing risk that might not be necessary when I kind of have a deal that I'm keeping close to my chest. Or maybe partnership folks sometimes try to take credit for deals where I should be getting all the credit as the direct seller, or this has been something that I've kind of championed along. And I think that stems from a legacy era that is over. That legacy era that's over is one where this data layer that Crossbeam unlocks didn't exist. And because of that, the reputation of partnership teams was kind of rooted in this idea of being folks that, have big press releases and show up to events and kind of do the hugs and chugs motions that, are kind of commonplace when you do a lot of kind of in-person, schmoozing style interactions with other companies. And the reality is, over the last decade or so, the nature of how partnership teams create value has radically, radically shifted. And I think the reputation just lags the reality by that decade or so. So the reality is that partner teams have suddenly, because of the cloud economy, because of the API economy, become this really, really critical and necessary access point through which you can pick up context and data and information and signal that you could not get anywhere else, and that you can access through the relationships you have with these partner companies. And instead of it being all human driven and relationship driven and kind of require those partner teams inserting themselves into deals or needing to kind of insert themselves in order to claim credit because the data for them to be naturally issued that credit is not there. We're instead transitioning into a world where you can actually modify and kind of force multiply the direct sales motions you are already doing and already trying to do just by infusing knowledge and relationships from that partner ecosystem right on top of it. So what I say to the sales leader who wants to do direct sales as their go-to-market is good. What are the tools you use to do that direct selling? Well, the dominant tools are things like, third-party data brokers where you might buy firmographic information or contact data. It's things like intent signaling platforms that might try and tell you, which prospective buyers are the ones you should be reaching out to do those direct sales. Well, when you look at ecosystem data, it's just a better version of those things that you can overlay on your direct selling program. If you want your direct reps to make sure they're talking to the right people at the right companies, the signal coming in from your ecosystem is the most powerful, prolific thing that you could possibly tap into. It's not the same commodity data that everybody else in your space can buy just by paying a third-party vendor. It's data that only you have access to because it's flowing in from your partner ecosystem. So run that direct playbook, but think of your ecosystem as this incredible force multiplier on top of it instead of an alternative to running it. That will make you much more specialized and much more focused, and doesn't mean you need to hire a partner team of 100 people to pull it off. A really, really well-organized partnership organization that can be this enabling layer that creates this connective tissue between your company and others is the unlock. And then what you're really doing is enabling your reps, enabling your SDRs, enabling your marketers to go do the work they were going to do anyway, but do it smarter and faster with companies that matter in the moment more. And that's the big, big difference now versus 10 years ago in terms of where partners fit into this mix. And, any sales leader that kind of listens to that pitch, I think starts to have it click. And that's really what we try to drive home in the book.
So, Bob, here's another one that I think is interesting. It's more about Crossbeam and maybe the tool that you use to engender and drive this ELG. But I think it's an important clarifying question. Let me just see here. Does the partner with whom I'd like to collaborate need to be part of Crossbeam?
Oh, this is a great question. So, yeah, let me clarify a little bit about how this works in general, because there are some really important things to understand about like the nature of how Crossbeam works. So the short answer to that question is yes, they need to be on Crossbeam. But an important distinction is what Crossbeam is and is not. So Crossbeam is not a co-op. And what I mean by that, there are these things out there called data co-ops, where the concept behind them is a bunch of companies get together. Those companies may or may not know each other. They may or may not be partnered with each other. And they all throw their data into one giant pile. And then some co-op administrator in the middle kind of joins all that data together, distills it down into some kind of high-level anonymized aggregated statistics, and then allows everybody in the co-op to then access that kind of derivative information. But everybody gets out the same amount, and they get it because they kind of toss their part of it in. That is not crossbeam. That's not how crossbeam works. You're not getting some reduced down aggregated data that is kind of the mushed together proceeds of what everybody contributed. The other thing that crossbeam is not is it's not a marketplace. And what I mean by that is a marketplace is a place that you would show up and you would meet up with potentially total strangers, right? Like companies you don't know, companies you don't have any kind of alignment with, in order to sell data or buy data or kind of horse trade data back and forth, because you're basically trying to procure something that'll be useful to you. We're not that, and there's no kind of economic exchange that happens between the companies on Crossbeam by nature. So then the question becomes like, what are we? What is Crossbeam? And the better analogy is that it's more akin to like a social network, but instead of connections between people, it's connections between companies. It's like LinkedIn for data. So every relationship that exists between two companies is one where both companies have proactively opted into being in that partnership and that connective tissue being established between them on Crossbeam. And every single one of those partnerships on Crossbeam can be individually managed. So what that means is you might decide to share a certain amount of data under certain conditions with partner A and an incredibly different profile and set of sharing rules with partner B. And you can turn those dials and customize them to your heart's content. But what you can be certain of is no company besides the ones that you have explicitly set up kind of a data sharing relationship with through Crossbeam is ever going to see your data. Like the nature of the way the thing works is that it's these individual connections that are finely tuned. And that just gives us incredible amount of control and confidence and kind of privacy assurances and other things to the companies using them. So I want to tie that back to the original question, right? Which is, does my partner need to be on Crossbeam? Absolutely, yes. Your partner does need to be on there because of the nature of what I just described. Crossbeam is not a giant pile of data that is kind of pulled together whether companies know it or not. Only companies that have decided to be on it are on it. The great thing, though, is we have this really awesome free tier of the product where you don't actually pay anything to sign up, to connect your data, to connect with other companies, to set up those data sharing rules. You really only have to pay for one of our enterprise offerings when you have more than a couple of users, or you want to take the resulting data that you got out of it and port it into another place, like your CRM system or data exports or through our APIs. And it's really in that stage where you're operationalizing the data when you need to pay. So if you want to invite a partner on to participate in this with you and kind of compare your data sets with a small number of users and just look at it in our UI, it's completely free. So the burden of getting your partners on board is actually extremely low. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's great. In fact, there was another question related to that about somebody's MVP. So can
Yeah.
Crossbeam be utilized by early stage companies who are ready to have their MVP tested by potential customers in a similar market and or market adjacent to the respective target market?
Yeah. So, if you've got that minimum viable prototype that you're kind of pulling together, and the question I answered earlier rings true for you, which is maybe you're small, but you've got some kind of intrinsic ecosystem style DNA and how it gets delivered. Yeah, you can go sign up for Crossbeam, use the free tier. If you're just a small number of people at your company, it's not even going to come up that you might need the paid tier, because a lot of that is driven around, having more and more seats or more advanced applications. Use it for free forever. And that free tier will put you in a place where you can start connecting with other companies. You can compare data with those companies. Even if you don't share the who's who or the detailed information about which customers overlap or which sales prospects overlap, you can set up rules to just give the high level statistics and say, okay, we've got 10 prospective partners that we might build an integration with here, as part of our MVP. Let's look at how many, high priority prospective customers or ongoing conversations overlap with each one. And it'll give you a real quick answer as to where the largest kind of serviceable, addressable market for that MVP exists and where to put those resources. So I would totally, if you're in that high ecosystem DNA universe, MVP is a great time to start kicking the tires on some of this stuff. And you can do it for free.
Great. One other one here. What strategy should nonprofits, and for example, supporting economic equality for women and disabled persons, implement to apply the ecosystem-led growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you zoom out a little bit and just think about ecosystem-led growth as a mentality, as a philosophy through which you can build and grow businesses, uh, this can apply in any situation where your buyer or your end consumer is one that gets value from what you offer that is enhanced when they're also consuming the product or the service or the benefit of any other organization. I gave this example recently. I gave a talk at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, which is the nation's oldest science museum that does a lot of work kind of centered around equality and access for students in the Philadelphia school system. They have a program called STEM Scholars that's really popular. And it's a great example of an ELG style partnership because you've got this large nonprofit organization in the Franklin Institute that has access to resources and materials and curriculum and folks that want to help in the community. And then you've got these local public and charter high schools that exist in the Philadelphia area who have students who are interested in STEM and kind of looking to have access to additional education and resources that maybe isn't able to be provided at the school level. And you think about what do those two organizations have in common? It's the people they're trying to help. It's the end consumer, the end buyer, which in this case is students who are interested in STEM or kind of curious about STEM. And the ELG play there is a program like STEM Scholars where you bring together the value proposition of the museum in this case and its resources, and the schools in this case, which is distribution, right? Which is access to the students and kind of the knowledge and context around how to reach and how to create programming for students that's going to resonate the most. And when those two organizations come together, it's an incredible, 1+1=3 joint value proposition kind of situation. So, rather than thinking about this from like how does it benefit me out, the right way to do it is to zoom out and think about what's your North Star? Who are the people you're trying to create value for? And then when you look at how they consume or experience what you have to offer, what are the other organizations, the other products, the other experiences that those folks can have where when it's consumed alongside what you have to offer, their experience is better. It's more likely to stick. It's more likely to click. It's more likely to reach them. It's more likely to be something that serves that North Star goal. And when you have that answer, then you know who your prospective partners are. And then you can start to say, okay, how can we compare notes, whether it's something data-driven like what Crossbeam enables or something more at the strategy level. And if you're doing that, you're doing ELG, even if you're way outside of the tech universe.
Well, Bob, I just got to say that was great. And thank you so much for your time and your engagement with our community, share your insights and set such a great overview. I just, on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone in attendance, would sincerely thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and such a great team over at NASDAQ and the NEC. Really, really great platform.
Well, thank you again, Bob. And so we love, and for the community, we love for you to join us for our upcoming webinars. You can view the upcoming events by using the link in the chat. And once again, I'd just like to say thank you all so much for joining us today. These events that we do, of course, are only made possible by people like you, Bob, and all the community here that's engaging and making this such a positive experience for everybody. So thanks again, everybody, and have a very prosperous day.